All right, let's talk about Charlie Kirk. He's a figure who, in a little over a decade, managed to go from a teenager in the Chicago suburbs to one of the most powerful and polarizing voices in American youth politics. Now, the source material we're looking at today is a speculative analysis, and it paints a pretty stark picture of his rise and a projected violent fall, a story that, it argues, could fundamentally reshape the entire conservative landscape.
So, how are we going to break this all down? We're going to walk through the 4 key acts of his story, just as the analysis details them. First, his explosive rise to fame. Then, the incredible political machine he built. Next, the doctrine he preached. And finally, the source's depiction of his assassination and the legacy it imagines him leaving behind.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The first chapter of Kirk's story, as the source tells it, doesn't kick off in Washington, D.C. Nope, it starts in the suburbs of Chicago. And it's right there that a real talent for political theater and populist messaging, which he honed as a teenager, set the stage for what would become a national movement.
What's just staggering here is the speed of it all. I mean, look at this timeline. The source documents him jumping from local high school activism to founding a national organization in just 2 years. He meets a mentor, decides to skip college entirely, and lands major funding, all before he was even old enough to legally buy a drink. It was a meteoric rise.
And this right here, this quote really illustrates what the source identifies as his core strategy. It was a brilliant move, really. Instead of letting not going to college be a weakness, he turned it into his brand. He basically framed himself as this self-made activist who was smart enough to see the system was corrupt and reject it. And for his base, that message was incredibly powerful. So, with that outsider brand firmly established, he set out to build what the analysis calls his primary achievement, the turning point machine. And this thing wasn't just an organization. It was a massive political conglomerate, engineered from the ground up for maximum impact.
And the fuel for this empire? An absolutely astonishing amount of money. The source highlights that by the 2024 fiscal year, the total revenue for Turning Point in just that 1 year had rocketed to over $84 million. Let that sink in. That's not just a movement, that's a corporate-level operation.
And he built this incredibly smart, multifaceted machine. He used different legal structures to achieve different goals. You know, the analysis points out how he used a 501c3 for all the tax-exempt campus organizing, but then had a totally separate 501c4 for the direct, bare-knuckle political fights. This structure let him operate on every single front, from the classroom all the way to the ballot box.
Now look at this financial trajectory. This boom, powered by a whole network of right-wing megadonors, happened at the exact same time as 2 other big shifts. A huge increase in his own personal wealth and a really dramatic radicalization of his message. It's like the more money that poured in, the more extreme the rhetoric became.
So this is the absolute crucial point the analysis makes. The money and the message were completely connected. His ideology wasn't static, it changed, it evolved, as the financial incentives pulled him away from dry policy debates and toward the much more profitable arena of cultural warfare.
And that evolution is just striking. I mean, look at this comparison. It's like night and day. Kirk started out sounding like a pretty standard Reagan-era conservative, talking about free markets and limited government. But then, with the rise of Donald Trump, his focus shifted hard to this pugnacious, grievance-driven Christian nationalism.
He really started to openly champion this idea of Christian nationalism. According to the source, he began to argue that America was facing a crisis because it was no longer a Christian nation, and that liberty itself actually required a Christian population. Politics was no longer just about policy. It was now a, quote, spiritual battle.
And as his ideology shifted, the rhetoric got, well, incredibly inflammatory. The analysis points directly to this quote, where he launches a direct assault on the legacy of the civil rights movement and its most revered leader, calling the landmark 1964 Act a huge mistake. And it didn't stop there. The analysis details numerous racially charged comments, including his full-throated promotion of the racist Great Replacement conspiracy theory. He actually claimed that certain immigration policies were a deliberate plot to diminish and decrease white demographics in America. And this might be the most chilling quote of all that the report highlights. He didn't frame gun violence as a tragedy to be solved, but as an acceptable, calculated cost for freedom. He called it a prudent deal. A statement that, in the dark scenario this analysis projects, would become his own grim epitaph.
And that brings us to the final, violent chapter that this analysis imagines. His death, as it's depicted here, doesn't end the story. Instead, It raises these profound, difficult questions about martyrdom, political violence, and the future of a deeply fractured America.
So, the source material constructs this very dramatic, and I have to stress, entirely speculative, end to his life. It depicts a scenario where on September 10, 2025, during one of his signature Prove Me Wrong debates on a college campus, the event is cut short by a single shot fired by a lone perpetrator from a nearby rooftop.
And the report captures this just grim, unbelievable irony in that imagined moment. In this scenario, his very last words are part of an argument over the specifics of gun violence statistics, the same violence he had once dismissed as a prudent deal.
In the aftermath that the source imagines, his legacy just becomes this massive battleground. To his supporters, he's a martyr for free speech, a hero who is silenced. But to his critics, and to watch groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League, he was a uniquely dangerous figure who normalized extremism and bigotry on a massive scale.
And that's really the central paradox this analysis leaves us with. It doesn't give an easy answer. Was Charlie Kirk a courageous champion of the First Amendment, or was he a bigoted demagogue who profited from division? And it poses one final and frankly dangerous question. In this scenario, would his death serve as a warning to cool things down? Or would it be the catalyst for an even greater, more violent conflict?